Alright, welcome to the Reason Workshop, Class 2. We're going to go over the mixing window. So we're going to open the template and do a mixing overview, then adjust the input gain, then dynamics, go through high pass and low pass filters, then parametric EQ, go over the insert and bus effects, then go through the fader section, then mastering, finally saving, exporting, importing audio and MIDI, self-contained settings, bouncing mixer channels. Finally, we'll have a test. Okay, so let's start out and just open a song in the file menu, and we'll just start out in the Reason folder under locations and go through the demo songs. Let's just take the bottom one here, Techno Squirrels. Press the space bar, play. Okay, let's check out the mixing board. This is called the channel strip navigator. You can just drag that higher or lower to look at more of it. There's also these channel strip hide and show buttons to view the different sections of the mixing board. So the audio or MIDI lane on the sequencer corresponds to a device in the rack, and that device sends signal to the mixing board. So this track, lead vocals, has a rack, and that comes through that channel strip. The signal goes through the input gain first, then down into this section where you can change the order of dynamics inserts. This goes into the dynamics section, then into the EQ, which is a high pass, a low pass, then the parametric. Then you have these insert effects, and then the effect sends, which route a percentage of the audio through those effect sends that are applied to every single channel. And then that goes here into the panning, the mute solo buttons, and the volume faders for the individual channels. Then all those are summed together to go to the master volume fader. That signal is sent through the master inserts. And then finally, the signal leaves at the master compressor. So let's solo channel 1, lead vocals, and just find where that channel strip is and look at it here. Let's first check out the input gain. That sets up the level before it hits the dynamics or the EQ. So a lot of times producers will set up something called unity, which is that the whole volume reaches 0 on the fader, so adjustments are easier. Now here on the compressor, we'll turn it on. Now compression is like an automated volume fader that reduces the dynamic range of audio, making loud parts soft, soft parts loud. So compression acts when the signal exceeds a certain threshold. Setting the threshold knob lower means that more of the signal is treated. The compression ratio determines the amount of gain reduction. So a ratio of 4:1 means that if the input level is 4 dB over the threshold, the output signal will be 1 dB over the threshold. So in other words, the gain level has been reduced by 3 decibels. Now, the highest ratio is known as limiting. That means any signal above the threshold will be brought down to the threshold level. So here you have the fast button, which is the attack, and that adjusts the amount of time it takes from the first sound until it achieves the volume level set by the ratio. The release adjusts the time that the compressor increases the gain once the signal has fallen below the threshold. Down here you have the noise gate, which is a volume cutoff that only allows signal to pass if it is above its threshold setting. So as you can see with these adjustments, range sets the gain reduction when the gate is closed. The threshold knob sets the level that it closes the gate. The release knob determines the time that it takes for the gate to close. And hold sets the time before release is initiated and gate close begins. Now that expander button is the opposite of a compressor, where the dynamics are accentuated instead of lessened. Here are the EQ, the high pass and low pass filters. First let's go over the high pass filter, which removes low frequencies from their signal and creates a thinner sound.
If you come closer, I will run faster.
A low pass filter removes high frequencies from the signal and creates a sound that is less bright. Down here is the parametric EQ. So that gives you 4 bands of EQ settings for boosts or cuts. So the decibels are the gain. Unaffected at 12 o'clock, higher settings boost, lower settings cut. The kilohertz or hertz knob selects the specific frequencies in the bandwidth. Q selects the width of the boost or cut. E just gives you more gentle slopes, and then bell gives you a fixed Q shape. Now down for the inserts. This will allow you to add in an insert, very much like a plug-in, for any kind of thing. Within the effects patches of Reason, you'll find delays, gating and chopping effects, all different kinds of different effects. And you also have on each one of those 4 knobs and buttons to alter the parameters of effects. So each one of those corresponds to the rack. The Edit Insert button will open up the rack to the audio or MIDI track device. Within that device is a little mini rack that houses all of those insert effects. Now let's check out the effect sends and returns. So you have these 8 send effect knobs. Those send knobs route a percentage of the audio signal through the effect that are assigned to that send and return. Those same effects will be applied to all of the instruments of the mixing board. All of those effects are routed into the master section. So this master section, which is the mixing board, within the rack, you have all those effect sends and returns. Hit K to isolate the routing of that. As you can see, it goes specifically into the effect sends and returns. So you can continue to alter and tweak those sounds. Now over here at the very end of the master section, you have your audio right and left. And those go into the main outputs of your hardware interface or your headphones. In the fader section, each channel has a solo and a mute. The panning knob affects the position of the track in the stereo field between the right and left speakers. The width knob selects the distance that it covers in the stereo field. The fader changes the volume output of that entire channel. And if you ever want to automate, all you do is right-click or control-click on that feature and select Automate, and a new sequencer lane will appear where you can record all those automations. Here's the master section. So you have your master volume, and it's very important to have that set so that it doesn't clip. And notice you can hit reset. Make sure down here on the transport that it does not clip. If it ever does, on that LED readout, you have a little reset button which you can press and to adjust the level. Now for control room out. So the control room does have a separate output on the back of the master section, which you can use as your main outs, or you could route it into another device. You have your control room out level. You also have what you're sending out of it, either master or an effects send, or if you want to hear the effects return out of it. And then you have the 8 different effects send buttons below it to select which of those effects sends you will hear. Now we have the master inserts, where you can choose another mastering suite to process the entire signal.
If you come closer, I will run faster. Come on, where's the challenge?
can always edit those parameters finer. Down here at the master section, if you show the insert effects, you can turn up certain knobs. And always the way to adjust knobs is just by clicking on them and moving up or moving down, and to greaten or lessen their value. And we'll certainly, you can also use the buttons to turn on or off different aspects of the mastering insert. If we just select the default mastering suite, we can go into that insert and affect the EQ. We'll start out with some drastic boosts. As a general rule, mixers prefer to do cuts before the mastering section on the individual instrument channels, and then boosts on the actual two-channel mastering insert. Finally, we have the compressor, the master compressor, which has similar compression settings that we've already gone over, the ratio and the threshold. Now for saving, exporting, importing audio songs, self-contained settings and all that. If you would like to export your song as an audio file outside of Reason, you select Export Songs Audio File in the File menu. And it will ask you where you would like to save that file, and if you would like to save it as an audio IFF, typically known as an AIFF file, or a WAV file. It'll also ask you what your export settings will be, if you want it to be 24-bit or 16-bit, and also what your sample rate will be. You can also import and export MIDI files. You just select Export MIDI File, and you could then take this into another program or into a hardware MIDI sequencer or something like that. So it won't give you the sounds of the instruments, but it will just give you the MIDI information. You can also export the loop as an audio file, and that will just bounce out the space between the L and the R, which can be very useful for certain things. And the last thing I want to show you is the bounce mixer channels, which is very effective. If somebody was interested in your track and they wanted all the individual files of it, you could just literally check all these files and immediately bounce all of those to a folder, and every individual channel will bounce out of Reason and be separated and isolated. And you can check if you want the master section included, the entire mix, as well as just the effect sends. You can also choose if you want it to be the entire song from the start to the end marker, or the loop from left to right, or apply all these mixer settings, or none of the mixer settings if you'd like it to be normalized. As well, you can set what your sample rate and what your bit depth will be. Dither has to do with file rate conversion. Most of this was recorded at 24-bit, and if you export it at 16-bit, then it will have to convert the files.